Can you guys hear okay? Okay, let me repeat that. So this meeting, okay, this meeting is being recorded. If you wish to not have your image or your voice recorded, we'd ask that you leave the meeting at this point. Otherwise, we will get going with the meeting.
Good morning, everybody. Our fearless chair Sae is out of town today, so you're stuck with me facilitating the meeting in my first official act as a vice chair today. So good morning. I am Matt Tuburin, Vice Chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. And I'm calling to order the August 10th, 2026 meeting of the PDAB. And today is a PDAB governance work session, so I think we can be a little less formal. Please don't refer to me as Mr. Chair. Matt is good for today. I note that we have a quorum present with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members. Does that sound correct? Right. And for members of the public, please note that public comments will be accepted at the end of our meeting, as they are at all PDAB meetings. We also encourage you to visit PDAB's website, where you can submit written comments at any time. And we will proceed with the agenda. So the agenda today is we have 4 governance policies that we are going to review and approve. And massive thanks to Erica and Matt Anderson, who led the working group to develop these policies. This is the hard, non-sexy work of the board, and huge shout out and thank you to you all for spending the time and effort on putting these together. I will note that 2 of these 4 policies we have seen before as a board and provided pretty substantive comment. So hopefully this will be an easy review on those. And we are going to start the process today with Stacy Shogun from MMB, giving us just a brief kind of overview of where we've been and where we are now and where we're going. And then Erica and Matt will lead us through the 4 policies, and we'll vote on them. We'll take them one at a time and vote on them. And want to just kind of remind the board that the working groups is where we do the really hard work of the wordsmithing and getting into the nitty gritty. So really the goal today is, can you understand these policies? Can you live with these policies? They don't have to be 100% perfect. We're not publishing Shakespeare today, but are they good enough to move forward with? And we can always come back and change them if there happens to be some sort of issue in the future. So with that, would like to move to approve the agenda. We're going to, as noted, an agenda was publicly posted in advance of the meeting. Noting our plan for a governance work session, we are going to adopt the agenda as published before the meeting, giving members the opportunity to propose amendments or additions. Are there any additions or changes from members regarding the agenda for today? Seeing none, without objection, the agenda published before the meeting is adopted. Are there any further motions or questions related to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll pass it over to Stacy.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. Along with my colleague Cameron Smither, who is also going to help as we're working through the process today here. So you might hear either one of our voices. As Matt said, we've got just a short slide deck here. You've seen most of this information, but in some cases, it's been a long time. This slide deck is meant to just ground you in some fundamentals of governance and this approach to governance that you're using called policy governance. So if you go to the next slide, please. My understanding, and I think, Matt, you covered it well in terms of retreat objectives, is to refresh memories, as I just said. And Vern, I don't know if you wanted to go and do that timeline review at all at some point in this, the time together today. That was something that we had also teed up. So That might be helpful for everybody to understand when everything is going to go live, how this is all going to work, when they might be seeing their first policy monitoring reports and things like that. That's the table that we've been looking at. And then finally, as Matt said, we're going to be reviewing all 4 quadrants of governing policies. There's many policies within each of these quadrants. I wish it was as simple as saying, we've just got 4 to go through and then we're done, but it's not quite that simple. Next slide. So there's just a few slides here to ground us. You've seen these definitions before. We've got a short definition of governance and a longer definition of governance, and then a definition of policy governance. Looking at the left side of the screen, short definition is that governance simply exists to translate the wishes of an organization's owners to whom you are accountable, and in this case, the citizens of the state of Minnesota. Into organizational performance. So you're a conduit. As a governing body, you're a conduit that connects those 2 things. The longer definition of governance is the coming together of a group of elected or appointed individuals to act as one for the purpose of guiding an organization of which they hold trusteeship towards the accomplishment of its ends, while establishing appropriate boundaries for accountability. So a longer definition, but really gets into what is the intention of a governing board. How do we guide, for example, which is why that word I've underlined because it's so pivotal. How do we guide without micromanaging? How do we create some expectations for Vern and the organization as to what should be ultimately achieved for Minnesota? And along the way, what's too risky or unethical or imprudent, those things that should be avoided. That's how we are thinking about the purpose of guiding an organization or governing an organization. On the right-hand side is a simple definition of policy governance. And I've been working with boards for decades now on governance and policy governance. And I often see board members make policy governance way more complicated than it has to be. So think of policy governance as simply a way of conceptualizing, organizing, and then ultimately fulfilling your mandate to govern. So it's a way of thinking about governance. How do we approach this? The whole guiding concept that you saw on the left side of the screen. And how do we organize? Well, we organize through a set of policy quadrants, each of which that have a different purpose. All right. I'm just pausing for a moment to see if that's sinking in. And then we can move to the next slide. So I see a lot of startup boards that rightly so want to help get everything set, all structured, all of those administrative details that need to be put on in place. It really does feel like all hands on deck for nascent, very new organization. Entirely appropriate to be acting the way you have, trying to get these systems up in place, particularly because you've got a very small staff. But governing boards also have to think towards the future. And how do we look beyond this new reality, this new creation that we're putting into place? So this slide is simply meant to help clarify the difference between a governing focus and administrative focus. So on the left, governing focus, we're very much focused on board level policy development. That's different from administrative level policies. Ultimately, staff will have a number of administrative policies that really don't make much difference to the governing board as long as those administrative policies comply with those higher level policies. Proactive accountability towards those on behalf you work. And I'll explain that a little bit more in another slide. Monitoring organizational performance, monitoring the board's own performance. And then you can see also, I talk a little bit about how some governing bodies choose to hold back administrative functions or they're required to hold back some things, duties that may not necessarily fit in the world of governing responsibilities, as does your board have that responsibility. On the right-hand side, you can see or refresh your memories more about what an administrative focus looks like. Hiring and managing staff, managing administrative systems, that interfacing with state systems, protecting assets, et cetera, et cetera. We start clearing out the distinction between these two functions and want to make sure that we're minding that gap so that eventually we create some synergy that can really make some things happen. Next slide. You've heard me talk about these as well. There are three fundamental governing responsibilities when we're thinking about governing in this approach. The first is to proactively engage with those that you represent to be fully accountable. So you're taking information in, and some of those systems in your case are already set, listening sessions, if you will. Taking that information in, thinking about how what you've learned impacts what you have to do as a governing board, not what Vern has to do as administrator, but what you have to do as a governing board. Turning that into language that Vern can understand, that's policies, ends, executive limitations. Collecting the data to show that the organization has achieved what ultimately those that you represent want to see accomplished, and then reporting that out. Second job, fundamental job of the governing board, is to craft policies. That is why you are here today. Third job of the board is to monitor. It doesn't do any good whatsoever to have policies in place if you're not monitoring that they've been complied with. So a robust monitoring process needs to be set up not only so that you know that you are complying with your own policies in governance process quadrant, but that Vern has lived within the policies that you set up for the organization, ends, executive limitations. Next slide. I think this is probably close to the last one. This is a reminder of those 4 quadrants of policies, 4 quadrants. Each policy quadrant does a different thing. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, ends, otherwise known as external results, and executive limitations. So ends say here, what is the ultimate good that this organization is trying to create? Who's the recipient of that good? And how much are we willing to pump in to the organization in terms of resources to make that good stuff happen? Executive limitations, I mentioned earlier, is all about creating some guide or guardrails for the achievement of those ends. Hey, Vern, along the way of achieving all these good stuff, here are the things that you have to avoid to protect the organization from unnecessary risks. On the left-hand side, upper quadrant is governance process. In that case, those policies speak to you yourselves. You're speaking to yourselves as a governing board. Here's how we're going to operate together. It goes beyond what you see in your fine bylaws into the details. How are you going to work together? What are our agreements for working together? The last quadrant, board management delegation, small set of policies that defines how are you delegating authority away to your executive director and holding him accountable for the use of that authority. So small but mighty quadrant of policies. And I believe that's where you're going to start today. This last slide is here if you need it. I didn't know how far you wanted to go on decision making today. So I put that up as a goodwill offering that if you find, hey, we need some sort of process, thumbs up, thumbs down don't work. We want to know where people stand. Matt, you might call this into play. Just to get a read from the group, it's sometimes helpful to use this gradients to see kind of where is everybody standing. And if we can get to the everybody's at the love, like, live with stage, that means you're good to go. Because you don't need to get to everybody loving every single word on this. And I think that aligns quite nicely with your opening comments, Matt. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Erica to walk you through your first quadrant. Yep. Oh, switch up on the top.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much, Stacy, for that good overview. And I wonder if before we jump right into the quadrant, Vern, did you want to walk us through that high level sort of, as Stacy referenced, sort of the
timeline?
governance
The
timeline?
timeline.
So I don't have that timeline
Oh,
right now.
why don't you start? Do you want to start with
Sure.
the first quadrant and
Sure.
I'll pull it up?
Sure. Yes.
And then we've got it for a break or whatever.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So, and did you say, Stacy, you have that quadrant that you can pull up?
Vern's got, he is the man behind the keys today.
Okay. So again, while Vern is pulling up the quadrant that we'll review, I just kind of want to give a little bit of a sort of reminder from my own standpoint as someone who's been working on the governance in the governance work group that on behalf of the work group, I also want to state that we understand these are a work in progress. And some of the dance that we're doing is, you know, making sure that we have governance processes in place so that we know how to function as a board, how to guide the executive director and the work that's being done, but also realizing that governance is a living, sort of breathing, organic thing. And so we're doing as best we can to come up with some of these quadrants, absolutely open for discussion. I can't imagine that very many of the things that might be raised today aren't things that we've talked about in the work group. So hopefully some of the work that we've done in the background will help us help facilitate some good decision making. So super, it's fine.
I'll just, for the purpose of filling in time, I'll also say, as Stacy's overview emphasized, this is about how the board works as a governing board. This is not about drug review
Mhm.
criteria or process or anything, the sort of substantive guts of what the board does. So the board has kind of a bifurcated role of activities that were expected, that the legislature has assigned to us. These governance quadrants are just about sort of running a board, not the substance of the work.
Vern, I sent you a link to that table whenever you want to have a chance to look at it.
Okay, so we've got the first quadrant up. And I think this will be a little bit of a dance between me and Stacy and Cam. They are experts and have been around the block many times helping boards do their review. And I believe that the first thing that we're going to do is have everybody do a quiet read through. Is that what we're going to have everyone do? Just kind of pull up this quadrant and kind of do a quick read through to refresh your memory. I believe this is one that we have reviewed together as a board.
Mhm.
Great. So this is not the first time board members are seeing this. But just a kind of a quiet read through to refresh our memories. Basically, I'll let you decide when you think everyone's had a chance to kind of peek through everything.
So if you just, once you're done reading, just make eye contact with me. Erica's not a good line of sight to be able to see, so let me know non-verbally if you're done. And Tony and Craig, I know you're operating remotely. If you could just let us know verbally that you've done your quiet read through, that'll help too. Thanks.
This is Craig. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. Matt, Steve, and Matt, Guy, man, how do you guys, how are we doing the Matt thing?
I'm
What?
done as well.
Thanks, Tony.
One voice, Matt A and Matt B.
Matt A and Matt B.
Did anyone have a nickname as a child that they're willing to let us use?
Uh-oh.
I think that Matt has one. Figure that one out.
It wasn't very creative.
Steve, are you ready to go? Okay, go ahead.
So
I think
maybe
gotta
we
go.
can first just ask if there's any high level questions or clarifications to the language in the ED delegation policy. Anything that needs explanation or?
And when you say policy, just to clarify, are
Sorry.
you talking about the whole quadrant? Or are you talking about,
Yes,
Specific part.
sorry, yes, just in general, just
general, okay.
asking of the policies, if there's anything that didn't make sense or anything that's a
in
question
these
before we-
policies? Okay.
So Erica, under the monitoring
Yep,
section, there's several monitoring options.
hmm
Do we need to pick one or are all of them available to use? How does that section read?
in,
So this is Stacy, Craig. I think your first line of defense as a governing board will always be to rely on written monitoring reports from your executive director, but you'd never want to not have the ability to look at any of these other options as a viable tool for assessing performance of the organization. Because while Vern is very trustworthy, that doesn't mean that you might not think, something just feels off. We want to have an external third party come in and do an audit or an assessment or whatever other services the state can provide as well. So I would never say pull any of these off because we'll never use them. Have them in your toolkit. More tools in your toolkit, the better. Okay.
Yes,
Steve
and-
got a question.
Things to measure.
microphone, sorry. Can you ask that? So Steve was asking who sets the schedule for monitoring? And I think that's another thing we've talked about as a governing board that, and Stacy, I'll have you jump in if I say, maybe what we'll do is if I say something incorrect, promise me you will stop me.
I promise I will stop you. And if I think that there's a little extra that might be helpful, I'll add the little extra too.
Thank you.
Okay.
So as a board, we can set the monitoring schedule. And, oh,
I was addressing not the schedule, but
Yep.
who sets the measures that you monitor, what you monitor, not when, but what.
yes, we do.
So, okay, and how do we do that at a board meeting or how do we?
We will set up an annual schedule, which we refer to schedule, but as part of the schedule, like these are what we're going to monitor over the next year. This is what we want you, the executive director, held accountable to. This is what we're going to measure your performance on. And this is what we're going to be auditing. And this is how we will determine whether or not, what level of success. So it's hard to say in a upfront in a policy, we're always going to measure financial performance based on
We just
base cash on
who
hand.
was going to do it.
I see. Yeah.
Erica.
It was just hanging out there.
So in that monitoring policy, that big, long policy with lots of little provisions underneath it, there's one called reasonable interpretation. Find the reasonable interpretation one in this quadrant of policies. It says reasonable interpretation and then goes on in the policy itself, in every case, the standard for compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So when you get a monitoring report from Vern, he will take the original policy of an end or an executive limitation. He'll provide a reasonable interpretation of that policy. This is what it means on the ground, because there's a world of information to provide the board on how this is acted upon administratively. In that operational interpretation, he'll also list his compliance indicators. And I think, Steve, that's what you're getting to, like what's the proof to demonstrate compliance? He will say, here's how I think I will be able to demonstrate compliance. Here are our indicators, and then provide the proof in a different section down below. The board's task, when you get your monitoring report, is to collectively decide, is that interpretation reasonable, including the measures for compliance? And then you look at the data section and say, well, did it demonstrate proof of compliance or not? So that's the two-step dance that the board members will do when they're assessing performance. If you do not like collectively, not individually, you speak as a whole board, not individual board members, the measurement plan because you don't think it was reasonable, then you send it back and say, here's where we had issues. Here's why we don't believe it's a reasonable interpretation or compliance indicators. And he has to have another go at it. So I think that might get more to the questions that you had.
And I think this might be the dance that we do for the next 3 hours, where the quadrant here is what we're establishing in our governance is that there will be internal report, there will be external report and board inspection. And as we continue to do the work of governance, we'll build out those particular forms and reports. So today's job is to establish the fact that that will be the structure we will use. We will ask Vern or an executive director to present monitoring reports. And as we continue the work of the board, this is kind of what we were talking about, that we know this is a work in progress and it's organic, but we want to get some high level how we will function documents in place so that we can start, so that we have a established, we have voted as a board that we will start doing these monitoring reports. So some of this will probably be higher level, Steve, maybe than, will be in the future, but great questions. And yeah. And I myself, as an executive director, I have a whole calendar of monitoring reports that I turn in to my board at different times of the month. So that would be where we would be going. And the way we structure it, I present those to the executive committee first, and then I present them to the full board at our board meetings. But that's all sort of within our governance structure to decide.
So this is Craig. I would just want to follow up on something that Erica just mentioned about the executive committee. When I look at the beginning of this quadrant, there's a section called responsibility to act. And says the executive director is only required to follow instructions from individual board members, officers, or committees when the governing board is specifically authorized that instruction. I'm sorry, there's an echo when I talk, so I have to get used to that. But in my experience being on boards, between board meetings or the absence of a board meeting to authorize an instruction, generally the board chair and the vice chair can provide direct instruction or clarification to the executive director in those interim periods. And would that be something to include here?
Yep. I certainly think this is definitely something we've talked about adding, that to give some oversight to either the the board chair or to the committee. Go ahead, Stacy. I love having you here.
I'm so glad. So the language in the policy responsibility to act, that's towards the top of this quadrant, says the executive director is only required to follow instructions from individual board members, officers, or committees when the governing board has specifically authorized that instruction. Well, of course, it's authorized the ability for the chair, vice chair to instruct outside of board meetings. They do so with caution, of course, because the best way of a whole board to maintain its unity is to speak through policy, speak direction through policy. But we also realize that there's the logistical things that have to happen, and that communication ability between the chair, the vice chair, particularly maybe committee officers or leads, work group leads, if you will, between those folks and the executive director is important. So I think you're covered here in this language, but if you think you need to open it up even more, that's fine. There was quite a bit of conversation in the work group about this one, and I thought in the dim recesses of my 62-year-old mind, we had talked about this as a full board once before as well. So what are your memories?
I know we talked about it in our governance work group.
Mhm.
I don't recall if we talked about it in the full board meeting to specify that, but I guess, Stacy, could you give us thoughts? Because my reference is often the way we do things on the Rare Disease Advisory Council, but to Craig's point, if we don't specify it in the governance documents in the quadrants, what would be other avenues to specify what kind of oversight, a chair or would that be a vote in a meeting?
Well, sure. Yes, absolutely. If there was an intention deliverable, this is what we expect the executive director to do, full stop, end of subject, then yes, capture it in the minutes of a meeting, a
Mhm.
proper meeting. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
In terms of where else you'd want to expand on those concerns that Craig lifted up within the quadrants of policies, this is the best quadrant to do this, because this is where you're speaking direction about how is our relationship supposed to work to the executive director. So this is the right home
Mhm.
for it
Mhm.
if you want to expand.
So I think putting that in a deliberation as a group kind of framework, the question would be, do we leave the responsibility to act this vague, or do we put some specific language in for what sort of oversight in between full board meeting a chair or an executive committee would have? Would you say that would be a good way to frame it, Matt? I'm trying to think how we can best set up the discussion and deliberation as a group.
So my, just one knucklehead's opinion, but I think that the way that the policy is drafted gives the board the ability to delegate authority to the executive committee and or the chair and vice chair as it sees fit. And that may change from year to year. There may be a time when there's issues that are particularly politically sensitive or something, and they say, we don't want the chair to make unilateral decisions. We want the executive committee to weigh in on this topic or whatever. And so my preference would be to let the board have the ability to make those decisions on a rolling, ongoing basis, rather than putting it in the policy and then having to change the policy each
Mhm.
time we want to change who has that discretion.
I would echo that too, just because if we get too prescriptive, then it becomes a dance of the board seeding things in perpetuity, because these documents are so, we would have to change the whole, to Matt's point, we would have to change the quadrant to be able to take back that authority from the chair. And let's say there's the chair is making decisions or, providing oversight to the executive director that the full board isn't necessarily in line with. That would be really prescriptive. So, as Stacy said, I think it covers being able to have that authority, but does anybody have any other thoughts or opinions about that? Or impression, or feedback?
Yeah, I think I would say I'm comfortable with the way that the language is written and that the intent of this is to provide some guardrails around how much direction Vernon is getting in between board meetings that aren't coming from the full board. So in our understanding of the chair of the executive committee, working with Vernon in between board meetings to help guide the work of the committee. And I don't feel we need to get super prescriptive with the overlying purpose of this is to say one board member can't feel like they have the authority to just start telling Vernon what to do whenever you have a whim to tell Vernon to do something, that's not the way we run as a board. And so I'm comfortable with the policy as written with that intent.
One of the things that we wanted to quickly cover in this is to just ask and get a sense of if this quadrant feels, were this to be the way that the quadrant reads, does it feel different than the way we've been functioning as a board? Is there any concerns around if there's anything, would it be changing the way that we're functioning right now? Or does it feel like it's reflecting pretty much the way that we've been building out our operation as PDAB as you read through it?
Not hearing any feedback. Are there additional questions, comments, concerns for our working group on the language? And then I don't know, Eric, if you're thinking of walking through this in any more specific detail, or if once folks have asked questions that we're comfortable to move forward.
I think this is a small enough quadrant that you probably just fine saying, any questions broadly, here's your chance. When it comes to some of those bigger, like executive limitations, you might want to go one by one just to make sure people are good. That's just my opinion though. Erica, you do you.
Yes, I'm trying to be sensitive to how everyone wants to do this. I would say that if there aren't any concerns, this quadrant is pretty high level. I will also say, I believe it's this quadrants. One of the dances that we have to do as a governance committee is really make sure some of the monitoring that we put on our executive director really syncs with the fact that the executive director is a state employee. And so this is that's some of the work we'll also be doing, but yeah, I don't feel like we need to go through this one line by line unless anyone else would like to.
Well, and just to facilitate that, since we just had some open questions, I'm hearing that Erica Barnes moves the board adopt the governing board's executive director delegation quadrant.
Second.
And I'm hearing that Matt Anderson seconds. We will now open the floor to questions, comments, debates before moving to a vote. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, I will take the roll. Vernon will take the roll?
Sure.
Vernon will take the roll.
Take the roll. I've had a pretty easy meeting so far. Craig Acomb.
Oh, need your mic on.
Aye.
Okay, Craig is aye. Matt Anderson,
Aye.
Erica Barnes,
Aye.
Tony Laurie,
Aye.
and Dr. McPay is absent. Dr. Schandelmeyer. Aye. And Matt Toberman. Aye. The motion carries 6 yeas, one absent. The motion prevails.
Congratulations, we're just flying through here.
Wow, I'm sure they're all going to be this easy. For sure.
Absolutely. So the next quadrant for our review is the governance process policies. We'll give folks a moment to pull that up and for Vernon to pull that up on the screen. Working group. Erica, Matt, if you want to give us the high level overview of this quadrant and what you'd like us to approve.
Sorry, there we go. Okay, is that pulled up? Good. So, Stacy, do you want to give us a high level view of what the purpose of this quadrant is and kind of talk everybody through this?
Yeah,
A little bit.
happy to do that. So you'll notice that at the start of all four of these documents, these quadrants, there's a purpose statement. That's not a policy. It's just a helpful reminder what the purpose is for each one of these. So in governance process quadrant, this is the board speaking to itself. How are we going to work together? What are our, how are we going to engage? What further direction do we need to give ourselves on things like group discipline or role clarity that you wouldn't have in your bylaws? So this is one step closer to detail of interpersonal relationships, perhaps, than you'd find in bylaws. Always starts with the broadest concern, and in this case, it's global governance commitment, very broad, and then down into more specific details with the subsequent policies. So that's how I'd set it up. Does that work? We good?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. And if you'll notice, this is a quadrant where we have had some discussion around some of the subparts of the policy. This is what contains our conflict of interest policy. And it contains language around there was something else we had discussed. Some of the it gets a little bit into investing, some of the budgetary items. I know that Vern has presented some budgetary costs. So it contains some stuff that we've already talked about. And I believe we reviewed that. This is one that we have also reviewed quite extensively already as a board. So again, not the first time that you all have seen it. As with the other quadrant, maybe we just take a couple of minutes for everybody to run through it and read it and familiarize themselves with it again.
And also, can I make just one other little?
Yes,
and that-
please
and
do,
that-
Matt.
This gets into, as Erica said, conflict of interest, some other areas where as we were working on this, we really tried to use the statutory language or just reference the statute to not change or create confusion between what the legislature has prescribed and what our own policies are. So just to sort of spoiler alert on that.
Yes, thank you, Matt. As he said, we really tried to cleave to statute and wherever we could defer to statute and use that as the guiding guidance. So again, with this one, we'll give some time for review. And then when you're done, if you could just look at Stacy and she'll sort of read the room for when everyone feels like they're ready. Also just want to note that especially toward the bottom where there is we have some placeholders, for example, to just call out some of the committee. We haven't specified some of the policies around board committees because we don't have those at this time. So right now, those are somewhat of a placeholder.
Craig and Tony, I'm checking in with you to see if you need any more time.
I'm good.
Craig's good, I think. And Steve, are we good? Are you good down there? Okay, all right.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So the first question I have to just, as Matt's kind of building off what Matt said, we really worked really hard to make sure that this quadrant especially really cleaves to statute. And so I guess my first question just globally is there any feedback on how well you feel like this quadrant reflects statute or any concerns around anything in this quadrant as it relates to how it aligns with our statute and the way statute defines our processes and our roles and duties?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think that makes a lot of sense that you really stuck to the statute in these pieces. And I just wanted to add, in anticipation of potential policy questions around the conflict of interest policy, knowing that that is, it's still very confusing to me. James is working on a sort of refresher presentation and kind of a guide and walkthrough to help support each of the board members in walking through the conflict of interest policy. Just want to let you know that that's in development and will be coming soon.
In general, I know we're not trying to wordsmith, and I will resist that, but there's one word we probably need to put in. Where it talks about meeting operating procedures, and it talks about fulfillment of its governing responsibilities in addition to drug review responsibilities. We should probably put the word costs in there. We're not really reviewing the drugs from a therapeutic standpoint or a clinical standpoint, but we're doing cost reviews of drugs. So we probably ought to put the word cost in there. And that's in the statutes, I believe.
That's great.
Meeting operating procedures.
Top of page 5.
Yeah, we don't have these numbered yet. We will. It says we will.
Yeah, I resist numbering them until you're all done with as much as possible.
I see it in
You
3
see
as
that?
well. Would
Yeah.
that apply to additional
drug
drug review and decisions? So just make sure we're adding cost review when we refer to drug review in total of the document consistently.
So the first sentence would say, meetings of the board will allow for thoughtful and thorough fulfillment of its governing responsibilities in addition to its drug and cost review responsibility.
Drug cost review.
Drug cost review.
So what I'm hearing is always having that modifier when we're talking about drug review, that it would specify costs. So we would want to make sure we flag that throughout the documents. Is that what I'm hearing, Steve?
Are you?
I believe so, and I believe that's
Yeah, that's
consistent with the
great.
statutes.
Mhm.
We're not here to review clinical aspects of
Sure.
drugs per se. They could be taken into account, but
Mhm.
we're not reviewing them or approving a drug to be on the market or anything like that.
Mhm.
Who will update that policy? Is that you, Vernon? Is that Stacy?
We were just whispering here. Cam is tracking that. We'll make sure it happens. We'll work in conjunction with Vern.
And then as a follow-up logistically, is that something we need to vote on, or because these have not been voted on formally, can we just, what do you think, Mr. Chair?
Since there hasn't been a formal motion, if you're accepting that as a friendly amendment, then we will just wrap that into the formal motion when we get there.
Fantastic.
Unless we can move it now, but this might be easier.
Let's just put it all in one big, fix it all. Any other comments around statute alignment?
One more, this one's
Sure.
not necessarily a wordsmith, but it's a scope issue. I think the last section of the document is titled Budget Governance Cost. But I think the document should address all budgeting costs. And these are fine things to have in the budget, but I don't see budgeting our primary work, which is doing the cost reviews. And that's not addressed in this document. It seems odd to address one area of budgeting and cost and not others, particularly when the other one is our primary function according to the statutes.
I'll let Tracy, check me on this.
Stacy.
Stacy, sorry, Stacy, check
Right.
me on this. But I believe the reason that this is the specification of these are directly related to supporting the way that we govern our and our processes. So things related to our ability to do
your
our
job.
job.
Yeah.
Versus oversight
But
of the budget.
What you're talking about, extremely important, has its own executive limitation that addresses all finance, planning, all of that stuff. So those concerns are loud and clear and a different quadrant of policies because they have to speak some direction to Vern. This is you just talking to yourselves.
But we have to budget for the work to be done that we have to do internally.
Yeah, and that's in the executive limitations policy. So it's in the policies.
Where I didn't see that in there.
That's in its own separate quadrant titled executive limitations.
I read that document. I didn't
Mhm.
see that in there. I mean, we can't govern ourselves if we can't do our work.
Right.
All of our work, not just the governance function or training or, auditing, all those things are
That is a
important.
good
I support all of those.
Oh,
So does our primary
look
work.
down at the very bottom of
map.
your ELs. The work group,
Oh,
remember
yeah.
work group, we had decided to set that one aside because and Vern, you were part of that discussion because we weren't sure yet how much flexibility we had for finance. So that's down in the bottom with some of the other TBD executive limitations. So there's a template that we can start with, but you didn't want to move on it or bring it forward to the full board until you felt like the timing was right to deal with finances. Does that refresh your memories?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Vern, you can speak to it, and then I can.
Sounds like your mic's not on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So what I was saying is when we originally worked on this several months ago, the budget, we weren't clear about our budget. But since that time, many more things have come into clarity in terms of buying data, hiring staff, doing patient outreach. So it's probably not as unclear as it was several months ago.
If I may, from a process standpoint, and I think Steve brought up the really important point that we need to be focused on the budget of the PDAB. However, in the policy before us right now, this is the governance policy. So the budget policy that's listed here is specifically saying we as a board want to budget for our own governance costs. I think we can have a larger conversation around the PDAB budget when we get to the executive limitations policy. Does that sound right from a process standpoint?
We can't put that function over with the executive limitations also and budget for it there where we budget for everything else. Because really you have to budget for everything at once to know what the priorities are and to balance things out. You can't do one out of this hand and one out of this hand. And
So when the work group comes back with a finance executive limitation policy, we can make sure that there's language in there that says, please be mindful that every year the board is going to sit down and say, here's how much money we need to set aside for our governing work. Make sure it's in the final budget proposal.
just like every other function we have to budget for has to be in the proposal.
Yep.
I'm not talking about taking anything out. I'm just,
Mhm.
why are we splitting things up in different places when it's really a budget, a holistic budgeting function?
I don't see having it in this quadrant as saying that we can't and shouldn't. I fully agree with you, Steve. I think I think budget oversight is a big part of our job. And also I think it being in this quadrant speaks more to what it falls under categorically more than, oh, we can't, we've got the budget split up. It's more just split up for, purposes of understanding the nature of the budget items, if that makes
It's-
sense. But
It's also reminding the board that it's your responsibility to sit down and figure out how much money do you need to do your job. So speaking to yourselves, this is our responsibility. If you pull it out, chances are it's going to default to the executive director defining for you what you need to do your job. So having it in both places or having these concerns in both places, there's a benefit to that.
I think the practical follow-up question for the board would be, do these look like the areas in which we should budget for the work that we do? Is everyone in agreement with the kind of specifications we've given to?
You're talking training, auditing,
Yep.
meeting information.
Mhm. And, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say just then one other question, one follow-up question for this. As with the last one, does in reviewing of this policy, does this feel like it's any different than what we've been doing? Does it feel like it's reflecting the direction we've gone as a board in the way that we've been governing ourselves? Any concerns that it's, any observations around that? Because as a governance work group, part of what we've been trying to do is both move us in the direction of good governance and also reflect the way we as a board have been operating together and capture that. So that's why I keep asking that. If there's anyone who's thinking, wow, this seems very different than how we want to function or been functioning. Stacey, is there anything I've missed in conversation? Everyone's so quiet. This is
I
not
know.
how I thought it was going to go today. So
So
I thought there would be lots of concerns with
In
Matt
the-
and I's
in the,
artwork.
in the absence of questions and discussions, but not to preclude those, so we can still have discussion, but I'll make a motion to approve I should actually have the document in front of me to, nope, it's not the executive limitation, the governance, process policy quadrant as presented with the following amendments, and that is where the document refers to drug review, amend it to say drug cost review. And to transfer the budgeting governance costs language to the executive limitations, finance and budgeting section.
I thought we were just comfortable where it was after that.
We are comfortable.
After
Okay,
that created
okay.
clarity.
I'll rephrase my motion. Move to approve the governance policy quadrant with the amendment of where drug review is referenced, we will reference drug cost review.
And I think what we also said, we would add language in this quadrant referencing the budget, correct? Did we say that? Stacey?
We'd add it to the executive limitations
Oh,
quadrant.
that quadrant would have a reference to
this one.
this
So we
budget.
interconnected that.
So
yeah.
Put some connection.
Matt Anderson moves the governance process policies with as amended. Do I hear a second? Erica Barnes seconds.
I second. This is so exciting.
All right, I'll take the roll. Craig Acomb,
Aye.
Matt Anderson,
Aye.
Erica Barnes,
Aye.
Tony Laurie,
Aye.
Dr. Nick Pay is absent, Dr. Schindelmeyer, and Matt Toberg. Aye. We have 6 ayes, 1 absent. The motion passes.
All right, good work, board members. We are now
2 to go.
on to the third policy of the day, the end results policy quadrant. Tell us all about the end results quadrant.
So the ends results quadrant is basically what we would like to accomplish as a board, what we see as basically doing our job. Stacy, do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Well, you were on a little bit of a roll there. So, and results policies are results external to the organization. It is not where you'd put concerns about, oh, we want to have the best data collection system ever. That's inside baseball. That goes somewhere else. So this is all about how is the world going to be different because of the work of this entity. So it ultimately answers with 3 short questions. What good are you trying to create? Who's the recipient of that good? And how much are you willing to pump into the organizations in terms of resources to get those results out? What good for whom at what cost? And then I think I'll let you take it from there because we've decided to hold on some of this stuff and you might be better equipped to explain some of that holding.
Yeah, and definitely people that were in the governance work group, Vern as well, feel free to kind of supplement my explanation for this. So we know that this end results quadrant is light right now. Part of the interesting thing about the Prescription Drug Affordability Board is that we both have oversight of the mission, and we also have end results sort of specified in statute in terms of our cost review. As we do that dance of sort of building out our work, we'll continue to refine the end results. And right now, Vern is really kind of helping guide the ship in terms of some of that, in terms of how we're building out our methodology for our cost review. And Matt, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that I would just, as a moment of confession, I always find it is a structural, stylistic rule that everything be phrased in the shall not, because we're limiting what the executive director can't do. I find that language awkward and off-putting and whatever, but it is what it is. And so just ask for others to have similar patience.
So, just a point of clarification though here, Matt, I want to make sure I'm hearing you right. In ends, there is no negative language in ends. You're just so excited to get to the executive limitations.
I apologize. I
Yep.
pulled up the wrong document. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Table
So,
that.
so I think what Erica, you were referring to is we've kept it very, very general here. It reads more like a mission statement.
Right.
Think about ends ultimately in things that this is just a 2-way communication between the board and the executive director. Here are the specific results we expect you to achieve. Things that can be quantifiable, things that you can see the results for. It would be really hard for Vern to take what's here right now and come up with monitoring information on it. So it really is a placeholder until, and that's fine, until you're ready to really flesh out what would those definite expected results be. Broad, but much clearer than what's here right now. And that was where the work group ended up being most comfortable. And I think the whole board also had a discussion. So this should not look unfamiliar to you.
Right. Yes, this is one quadrant that we discussed at length.
Yeah.
And discussed the dance that we have to do as a board with specifying those results, but keeping them broad enough that they're actually achievable and attainable, and that we think reflects the work that we'll actually do as we build out our work.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think a year from now, we would be having a very different conversation about this because we really are in the next few months getting to the point of actually doing our work. And in doing that work, I think will illustrate what you would want to hold me accountable for in terms of outcomes in that work. So we'll probably be having the same conversation in another year or so after we've done some work.
So any reflections on that? I didn't give people time to read this because it was so short, but any comments? I see, Steve, you've got your hand up.
First comment is this is not too long.
Right. No, it is not.
Maybe it erred on the side of brevity even. I think the end statement is missing the punchline. The statute that was passed is for us to consider after a cost review, if there's an affordability concern or challenge, and establish an upper payment limit. And I don't see those words in here. And that's what the statute says. So I appreciate the adherence and desire to adhere to statute and setting our governance, but I think it's missing wholly in this one.
Process question, and I don't know, Vernon, if this is for you, how do you envision the board fleshing this out in the future and sort of where we go with this policy?
I guess my thoughts on that right now would be to actually develop our drug cost review process, our affordability determination process, and then the process of setting the UPL. And then having gone through those things once, I think it'll become pretty clear to us, to the board, where they would want to put specific detail in terms of how the executive director is held accountable for receiving those results. I understand what Steve is saying in terms of there are kind of those three direct activities. And it's not my place to make a recommendation. At the same time, if you were to just list those activities without what the specifics are in terms of holding someone accountable for them, it does make it a little clearer that the end results we're talking about are in the context of those activities.
We spend the next year and do lots of things, but we haven't done a cost review, an affordability challenge review, and an upper payment limit. The legislature is likely to say you haven't met your end results. That's the end result they expected from us. So I don't see how we can leave it out of. You can put other words in here that you want, but if we don't include that, the legislature is likely to conclude we aren't going to meet our end results from their perspective. Mr. Chair.
I respectfully disagree. I think our end result that the legislature charged us with is to protect our Minnesota residents, the healthcare system as a whole, and employers from unaffordable prescription drug prices. Cost reviews, upper payment limits, proposing changes to legislation, recommending that CGIP start a group purchasing pool. We have all kinds of ways we can accomplish that, but we can accomplish it without setting an upper payment limit. Like, it is theoretically possible that we say we've done cost reviews and we chose not to do an upper payment limit. We haven't failed.
I don't see where the statutes tell us we are authorized to do those other things. We could do them, but it doesn't say we commissioned this board to do those things.
No, it said it commissioned the board to protect Minnesotans and the healthcare system from unaffordable prescription costs. And it gave us authority. It gave us authority to do certain things, but it does not require us to do anything.
Well, yeah, but if at the end of a year or two or three, we haven't done anything, then we're probably not going to be here anyway.
Unless prescription drug prices have dropped 35% and they say, wow, just having the threat really helped. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying, I'm not holding my breath. I'm just saying that the purpose we were given was to achieve a result regarding affordability. It is not the purpose to take these actions.
I would agree with Matt because I could say it in the inverse, Steve, that if we get to the end of the year and we've done cost reviews and we haven't moved the dial, the legislature could also feel that we haven't accomplished our purpose, which is to help
Right.
the affordability scenario. So we fear if we get caught up on some of the milestones or the levers, we might be focusing on the trees and miss the forest too. And so that's the dance we're trying to find.
Yeah. We're just-
This is Craig. I actually agree with Steve on this. I think that there are some sort of key components that were expected when our PDAB was stood up with full UPL enforcement capability, unlike other states that were advisory in nature. And, you know, whether we fully implement a UPL or at least identify drugs that would be candidates for UPL, I think the legislature is expecting some movement by this board in that direction.
So we have a draft policy before us, and I'm hearing that there's some desire to add to this. I guess the question is, for us today, is this good enough to approve to move forward, knowing that this is that we will continue to work on this as we move forward as a board? Or does this need more work before we can move forward? And if we want to, Eric and Matt, move this and then we can have that debate.
Sure. So you want us to move the motion to approve and then we can have a debate around it.
Mhm.
So I make a motion to approve the quadrant for ends results.
I'll second and request a comment.
The end results policy as proposed has been moved and seconded. And we'll open it up to comments, starting with Matt Anderson.
And I'll just read from the statute. Commissioner of Commerce shall establish the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, should be governed by a board under section blah, 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 to protect consumers, state and local governments, health plan companies, providers, pharmacies, and other healthcare system stakeholders from unaffordable costs of certain prescription drugs, period. That is the first subdivision of our enabling legislation. It states what the legislature expects us to do. That is our end. That is whether or not we accomplish what we are supposed to accomplish should be judged by whether we have protected consumers, state and local governments, health plan companies, providers, pharmacies, and other other healthcare system stakeholders from unaffordable costs of certain prescription drugs. How we go about that, we have a lot of authority and a lot of different ways that we can do it, but that is the end result we are designed to achieve.
Yes, and that is an extraordinarily large task and goal. And we are not authorized to pull every lever that could achieve that outcome. We are given specific tools and responsibility to manage a piece of that, particularly in the cost of certain drugs, and only through setting an upper price limit in our ability to affect those changes. And so it's really also identifying and recognizing our lane in achieving that broad statement that Matt accurately recited from statute.
Tony, I see you got your hands up.
Yeah, so, I mean, while I agree, I think we likely will be judged on whether we've moved forward, with a cost review and a determination as to whether there are affordability challenges. I also don't think that we need to actually go that far in our end results policy statement as we stated here. I mean, I think we all realize that. And that is what we're working toward as a goal, but I think these policies can be left at the most general sense and still serve us well. That's my take.
Can I make a comment? I support leaving the language general in terms of the levers we have, as Matt stated. I will say that I agree to a point with you, Tony. I will say that in terms of the end result statements, I do think as we go along, we do need to put some more detail in, simply because knowing that the end results both is kind of our mission statement, but also guides the work that Vern is going to be doing. I do think eventually we need to put more meat on it, and walking that careful dance of not putting in so much details that we're obligating ourselves to certain levers that, as I agree with Matt, were given to us as tools, but not as necessarily mandates for how we go about addressing affordability in the state of Minnesota. So I don't think the work is fully done. And I wonder, Stacy, if you have any thoughts about that. Am I on the right track with sort of helping the board understand that the end results both need to be broad to encompass the actual end goal, but also give some direction to the executive director?
I'm appreciating the mindset that you have here. You could leave it the way it is right now. Temporary plug is how I think about it. Be mindful, if you left it the way it is right now, then when it comes to the point in time where Vern's got, I'm looking right at you and I'm calling you Matt. There are entirely too many Matts. Gee. So when Vern has to put a monitoring report together, he's going to take this one lovely, nice, long sentence, and he's going to have to be the one that's interpreting that. He's going to be the one that's going to have to figure out what are the compliance indicators and providing the data. So he could do any reasonable interpretation of this statement right here. And that would stand, as long as you all say, well, that's reasonable. But individually, each one of you would want to go into more depth. So you're saying put more, like as soon as we can, let's put more to it. Absolutely. Ands aren't how you get there. There's what it's all about, the what is there? What's the final result? So that's where the broad language still holds true, but this is not specific enough for long-term use. You'll get frustrated if you left it here for too long. It may help if, when you're setting up your monitoring schedule, which is on the table that you have yet to review with the whole group, you time this out to give yourselves a little bit more runway and then get in there. I know at one point we had worked on an entirely robust set of ends and the board wasn't ready to go there. Maybe you are ready to look at that now and say, oh, okay, we're in a different place. Don't know.
So does what Stacy just said help us sort of figure out from a decision-making standpoint? Is this one, well, we made a motion to approve it, but of course, people can make counter proposals for how we build out this work and how much more time we spend on. And as Stacy said, we did have a very detailed one that felt too prescripted that we reviewed at one point. So in terms of the next steps, Mr. Chair, I'll let you help with that.
And if it's Eric, if it's you, maybe with help from Stacy, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you see the process moving forward when it comes to building out what that monitoring report for Vernon will be. And it sounds like we want to kind of get into it to kind of really understand what we really want and need out of that. So as we get into this, we start to build out that more. How do you see that process developing, and that if we need to come back and add more to this language, kind of how we would do that as a board? And would that be with the working group? Would that be at the executive committee level? I don't know if you have some vision of how you see this moving forward. Or Stacy, if you have some thoughts on.
I would
ahead.
say that this is, I would say at least initially, this is sort of guts of an annual meeting that we would say, this is what we want to accomplish over the next year. We aren't, I don't think that the board is at a point where we can say, this is what we want to accomplish over the next 5 years or the 10 years or whatever, to be putting in policy. This is what we're going to accomplish, and that the executive director is going to be held accountable to. I think that is an annual work plan combined with budget to support it. I mean, that's the other thing, is we got to be able to pick goals that our executive director is accountable for, with resources that can actually accomplish those goals. And I don't feel, I personally, just speaking as well, I don't feel like I have a good enough sense of what our budget is, how long these cost reviews are going to take, what the legislature may or may not do, what courts may or may not do. I feel like we are very much in a murky situation where I would like to have as much ability to adapt more in real time, to be able to set goals and expectations for the executive director on a shorter time frame than I envisioned the policies being.
Any additional comments, questions?
Just before we call the question, I want to explain how I'm viewing it. I certainly agree with the one statement that's here. That's the preamble in the legislation. But the legislation wasn't written just to be a preamble. It was meant to accomplish a goal. I agree with everything in this preamble. I would love to accomplish all of those things. We can't accomplish that, all of those things. We can accomplish a few things. And if we don't focus as a Prescription Drug Affordability Board on affordability and ways to change it in concrete ways, then we won't accomplish what the legislature had hoped for us in this preamble. And so I support the preamble, but I may not support that as a sole purpose.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking back to the conversations we had when we did have that longer list of end results, and where we kept getting caught up on things is kind of activities, tactics versus goals. And we kept getting caught up in trying to list goals, but talking about the tactic of a review, of an adverse or a affordability determination, of a UPL. And I think if we even started that conversation again today, we would still get caught up in that. Mr. Chair, this is not my role or responsibility, but one approach would be an understanding that maybe it's in 6 months after we've done some work that we come back and revisit this conversation to see, based on our experience, is there more detail that we could add to this, to Steve's point?
And Vernon, in the timeline, which we didn't give you a chance to show yet, do we have built-in reviews of these policies, like at our annual meetings? Is this already, will that be sort of built into our work?
Mr. Chair, let me find the timeline. I'll put it up for folks.
Yeah, and we can add to that too, once you've responded, Vern. And I think Cam had a thought too on this conversation when the time is right.
Just a minute.
I think now's a good time, Cam.
Oh boy, okay. Good morning, everyone. Cameron, I've been quietly listening. But the conversation about end results reminds me, this is when I visited last time in March. And to maybe remind us, scare us away from going down this road right now. If we wanted to unpack this further today, that looks like defining affordability, defining who counts as a resident, right? So it's less of process focused, to Vern's point. It's less about unpacking the levers and more about unpacking what do we mean when we say this language that's here? How would we define affordability? What does it mean commensurate with the resources? That's the sort of unpacking. So I don't think we have time. I would encourage you all to take more time for that versus doing it today.
So yes, I think that Vern pulled up the list. And again, I would just emphasize that we definitely feel like we do need to put more meat on the ends in the ends quadrant. But as Cam said, we just feel like we would like to see this grow organically with the work that we do and sort of be a dance between how we define our work, because it is such a broad scope. And once something goes in an ends quadrant, you've failed if you haven't done that, is what I would say would be. I don't mean to make really strong language, but I feel it does. That's why I would advocate for keeping it broad, because we know we're on firm footing when we put in, we know that the legislature wants us to address affordability. And that is something that I think can drive us. And I see I know it may seem performative to have something so broad, but it really will keep us grounded on what our main focus is and keep us cleaving to, we can do all these things, we can use all these levers, but if we're not addressing affordability, we've sort of missed the mark. So that's sort of my final pitch for approving this, with knowledge that we will continue to work on it as is specified by the schedule.
Mr. Chair, to your question about, is there some process already built into the timeline to do the type of review we're talking about? If you look at the fifth bullet point down, the annual policy monitoring schedule has been determined. So I would see that as it's not just the monitoring, but it's also kind of a review, right? That the policies are where we want them to be, where the board wants them to be. Yeah, sure. It actually doesn't go quite into the detail that we were just talking about, but it does at the very end talk about setting a monitoring report, at least a first monitoring report. Or am I wrong,
I
Steph?
think you were talking about, wasn't the original question about policy review, right? So back in a quadrant that you've already reviewed this morning, your governance process, you have a policy self-assessment. At least annually, the board will assess and discuss its performance against these policies and implement plans as appropriate. That's the time that I always encourage boards to just look at the policies. You've just reviewed your performance against them. Do you need to change something in your policies in governance process quadrant? The other discipline about policy review, thinking about ends and end results and executive limitations. When you get a monitoring report from Vern, one of the last things you'll do in that assessment process is go back to the original language and say, now, based on everything we've just seen, do we need to adjust our policy language because it's sent the organization in a place we don't want to go, or whatever it might be? So that's built in to your system. There's no time once a year that you sit down and get to do this joyous experience of looking through everything. It's built into when your heads are already in that particular game. Okay.
So then I'm wondering if the question, Matt, is that sort of what's already laid out robust enough to address the concerns around the end results, or do we need to add? Is that kind of what you were asking?
I think just to put a little finer point on it, knowing that that we have a little more clarity on the process moving forward. We have the motion before us to vote on this language as written. And if folks have any more questions, comments, conversations, changes that they want to make. And if there are none, we will move forward with a vote. So I want to make sure the folks, that floor is open for any additional comments and discussion folks have. Not hearing any, we can move forward with the roll.
All right. The question is to approve the end results as drafted. Craig Acomb,
Aye.
Matt Anderson,
Aye.
Erica Barnes,
Aye.
Tony Laurie,
Aye.
Dr. McPay is absent, Dr. Schendelmeyer,
Nay, for the reasons I stated.
and Matt Tobrin.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we have 5 ayes, 1 nay, and 1 absent. The motion prevails.
All right, congratulations. Vernon, my apologies. You had the governing system installation plan that I so rudely did not let you present on, which I think caused some confusion. Before we move into the next policy, would you like to present this, or was there anything else in addition that you wanted to walk through for the board before we got into this additional policy?
No, we can walk through this, and Cam and Stacy can help me because we developed this a while ago. But let's move down from the text to the actual tasks.
As Vernon's pulling that up, just kind of a housekeeping note, we've gotten some notes that the feedback for folks online can be rough. And so if you are not speaking, if you could please mute your microphone to help cut back on that audio issue.
All right. So we're already past some of these landmarks, but we're on track. Here we are today at the August 10th work session. The idea was to review all of this. Well, Stacy used the term stray policies, but evolved all the policies, understand and evolve the understanding of the governing system. We have a legal review completed, although there is a new question that has come up that we haven't brought up yet in terms of, we brought up a little bit in terms of the interaction of these policies with the labor contract for the executive director. That will still be an open item. The intent today, if everyone's comfortable, would be to approve all 4 quadrants with that caveat that we still need to do that review, run it by the union, run it by Commerce, my employer. The next step would be to start with these quadrants completed with an asterisk, to start developing the draft manual. That's where these would be housed, but there would also be other text in there that would provide guidance to the board about how to use that tool. The intent was sometime in September. We have a September 29th board meeting. If we're still on track, would be to review that governance manual and approve it. Having approved the 4 quadrants probably makes that process relatively easy. The manual itself is more perfunctory after that in terms of language and background. October meeting, which might be early November, depending on where we're at in our work, the board would formally activate those policies. And there would be a policy report due in January from me to the board. November, as Stacy called it, I go into monitoring boot camp. Learn, and I'm going to rely heavily on Erica and her experience in terms of being an executive director and doing monitoring and producing reports for the board. There would also be some type of tutorial for the board on how they are going to assess the monitoring reports that I provide to them. And then I don't know about the January timeframe, but that there would be some type of, after everything's up and running for a while, coming back and just a refresher and a check-in with Stacy and Cam. And that's kind of where, as far as we've gotten.
That's something to add, Stacy, to that, or did you?
If I did, it is completely gone.
Comments or questions for Vernon on the process? So what I'm hearing is it's glad to know that Stacy's going to be with us through the long haul here, helping hold our hands as we get these policies implemented and developed, and as we go from baby board to more established board status.
And if I could just add a comment, Matt, I think, I sense that, which is always the case with boards, that the concern is always, do we have governance documents that are robust enough to really reflect and capture the work that needs to be done? And I would just say that in my opinion and experience, as Stacy and Vern get into the work of the draft manual, that's going to naturally lend itself to seeing areas of quadrant modifications potentially and or capture some of the details. Sometimes when we bring things up, I know, Stacy, you've said many times, well, that's a policy. That's a policy. So as we build out that manual, we will start to put some flesh on some of these things. So again, just reminding everyone that this is a dance as we build these things out, and this is high level for a reason.
Thank you, team. With that, we will move into the fourth policy, executive limitations policies. Do y'all, are we? Well, folks want to take all right. There is a request for a 5-minute break, so we will return back at 10:50. Great, thank you. I will call the PDAB back to order, and my apologies to the board and to our guests and our guests online as I called for a 5-minute recess. I got overly chatty and we are late, and that's on me, and I apologize. So we will jump back into our fourth policy of governance quadrant of the day, executive limitations policies. I believe the process will have kind of some overview, high-level comments. We'll give folks a few minutes to read through this again, and then the working group will walk us through policy by policy since these are a little bit more in depth. So with that, I will pass it off to the working group.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so just a quick overview of the executive limitations policy. So this is really the quadrant that allows us to really direct the work of the executive director. It establishes, as the document says, some boundaries around the work of the executive director, kind of what's, as Stacy has said many times, what's out of bounds in the work that the executive director does. To give a little bit of context before we have you do a read and then a walkthrough, we are in process of, and there is a bit of a dance with the fact that we as a board are given the ability and the mandate to guide the work of the executive director. At the same time, our executive director is a state employee and part of a union. So we're in process of kind of just making sure that we're mindful of those sorts of things. I will also say that as a fellow executive director in the state, there's also a sense, as we've gone through as a governance committee, there's also an understanding that the executive director of PDAB does have monitoring requirements as a state employee and being under the state. So we want to be careful not to find that balance of doing the work and doing the oversight, but also not overburdening someone with monitoring, compliance. So that's kind of the things that we considered as we built out this quadrant as a governing committee. And those are things we'll just bear in mind as we go through this work. So this might be the point where we take a few minutes if everybody wants to look through the document, and then we will do a deeper dive in this one. Okay, so unless anyone feels like they need more time to review on their own, we're going to go ahead and get started and start reviewing, as we said with this quadrant. I believe we have not reviewed this as a board together ever. So yet another reason I feel like. Right. So thus it even warrants a little more of a deeper dive. And of course, as we said, this is where it really gets into the work and really making sure that we're providing good guidance and good leadership and direction to our executive director. So as I said, we'll go through this section by section. Matt, this might be what you were referring to. This might be the time for you to remind everyone sort of the uniqueness of the way the Carver model uses negatives. So if you want to sort of say what you said before in terms of.
Now it just lacks the drama, so.
You said it so passionately before.
So it just that everything in the Carver model for the executive limitations is phrased as what the executive director can't do or what the boundaries are that the executive director can't cross, as opposed to identifying the things that the executive director should do or must do or would like him to do. And so like I said, I don't really prefer writing that way, but that's the idea is that the executive director has discretion to act within the boundaries that we set and have the flexibility to make decisions and operate the organization, without having to follow legislative like item by item authorizations.
Thanks, Matt. So let's just go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to let Stacy and Cam sort of help us facilitate this in case there's anything they want to call out. I know again, in our governance work group, we had some good discussion on all of these, but we don't want to make the final decision for the board. So maybe we'll jump right into the asset protection section. Or did you want to back?
Yeah, I just want to back up for one bit, and that's at the global executive constraint. That is a policy in its own right. And it will be monitored in its own right. It's the broadest prohibition that the board could give to Vern. And then everything else fits underneath that. So theoretically, a board could say, the only executive limitation we're going to put in place is the global constraint. Don't do anything bad. Most boards have more to say, and that's what those additional policies are all about. How we monitor compliance with the global executive constraint is a conversation for another day. I haven't lost a group yet. I won't lose you. It just will take some time to explain. So let's table that one for later. I just don't want you to realize or to think that that is not a policy. It is a policy. Okay, so with that, if you want to go into asset protection, that makes sense.
Great. So this quadrant, of course, just deals with the way that the executive director treats the resources and assets. I believe that the electronic and information assets, this one is important. And so if there's any feedback or thoughts on this one, this is important in that we know that we have particular responsibility for intellectual property. And so we really take that seriously, and that's called out in this limitation that intellectual property will be protected. But want to open the floor to see if anyone has any concerns with this language or wants to make any comment. Steve?
Non-data was inserted in front of assets. So does this mean the executive director doesn't have to protect the data assets? That's the way I would read it. That would be a reasonable interpretation. I don't think that was your intent, but it reads that to me under asset protection, the first line.
In the spirit of figuring this out together, because this has evolved over time, I wonder if that was an addition added because the proprietary information was its own thing for a while. And so
Mhm.
we weren't addressing that here. And then maybe we decided, no, we should pull it back in and we just didn't take that word out. So it could
I
be an
would say
easy
this
fix.
Right.
leaves it exposed.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and even more than just the proprietary information, we shortly will be, right, we're going to have contractual relationships with data sources.
Mhm.
And those contracts are going to require us to provide levels of protection for those assets.
Or add non-data and data? Would it be?
I would just eliminate non-data. I agree with
Yeah.
Steve.
That was Tony.
Tony.
Yep. Tony, I thought I heard you say that you agreed with Steve. Is
Yeah, just
that
remove non-data and just,
okay?
will not cause
Yep.
the organization's assets. I mean, and data is one of our assets and should apply to data.
So in that same vein, in the upper part about global executive constraint that we're setting aside for the moment, it does talk about enterprise-wide policies, including the Department of Commerce. Are we protecting our data from commerce as well?
I think with the clunky grammar of the negative language of the Carver model, the way I read that is that the executive director will not violate any practice that's been established by the state of Minnesota and Department of Commerce, as I read it. So I think it's intended to make sure that we're in alignment with enterprise-wide standards and policies. And we've, I believe, also said that as a PDAB that we would make sure that our protection of data and assets would align with the Minnesota Department of Health in so much as we're working with them and collaborating with them.
Which
But is
I
anyone else
agree.
reading that?
And I agree, Eric. I think my question was that would that mean that commerce would have their IT would have access to our data under their enterprise policies, or because the Department of Health and our own proprietary language is requiring us to shield that data, would we be shielding it? Is there a firewall with commerce that we can put in place or should put in place?
Craig, it's a good point that we haven't really talked or thought about.
Right.
An issue to think about as we do think about this is I do have Department of Commerce assets. I have a minute team. They're part of the Department of Commerce,
Mhm.
and they're actually helping us set up the
Mhm.
storage place, the connections for the data from Metaspan, from IQVIA, the APCD data from the Department of Health, and of course our own data and work project. Those assets do all reside on a
Mhm.
IT system that is ultimately part of the Department of Commerce. So it's a good issue. It's not something that
Right.
we've thought or talked about.
James, is this a legal concern we should be worried about today, or do you believe that that's already covered in other areas?
I don't view it as a legal concern. I think, to Vernon's point, I think we can get a better answer from Minute to be able to explain this to the board and the public. It's my belief that Commerce does not have access to the data just because it's stored on the Commerce servers. And as a kind of bureaucratic matter, we do need Commerce's help and Minute's help in order to establish this. So I would propose we come back with, the better, more fulsome explanation after we gather it, but I don't see a legal problem with proceeding with the way it's written right now.
So what I'm hearing is that we'll leave the language in the quadrant as written, but we'll do a follow-up and get back to the board on that great question. But as it stands, it isn't something that we're hearing that would merit modifying the quadrant to sort of reflect that question and concern. Okay. Any other questions or concerns in the asset protection section? Okay. So while it looks like it's kind of under the heading of asset protection, shall we move to public image and liability exposure?
And that simply means that your public image is an asset, right?
That's what I was
So-
thinking.
yeah.
That was what I was thinking logically, how
Yep.
it,
Yep.
how it went.
So it is absolutely part of that branch. And each one of those provisions will eventually have their own number. 1.1.1.1, 1.1.1.2, whatever it might be. So that will help.
Those feel pretty straightforward to me. Shall we go on to emergency executive director succession? Some of this is just very straightforward sort of policies that aren't specific to PDAB. Just kind of the way that we lay out executive director functions. Again, there's a conflict of interest section, and that is based on the board's conflict of interest policy as well. So any questions around conflict of interest for the executive director?
Erica, nothing about
Yes.
conflicts of interest, but the succession part.
Mhm.
So what is the succession plan? If Vern was immediately unavailable, what happens in your organization, Erica, if you were
Yes.
immediately unavailable?
Yep. I was just going to say, I believe, and Vern, maybe you have, if it's not different in commerce, I know that I do a whole separate kind of, it's called a COOP plan. I cannot remember what it stands for, but it's a whole thing that I'm required to go through with the state of Minnesota to identify what would happen should I, get hit by a bus across the street. And so that's something that there's a whole policy and procedure. And I imagine there's one in commerce, Vern, we can look into
Yeah,
that.
So I've not been made aware of or had a conversation with Commerce about that, but it sounds like it's something we should do.
Mhm.
I'll talk with Julia Dreyer, my contact in Commerce, to see what they do or don't have in place.
Mhm.
But yeah, there should be a written explanation of this
Mhm.
that the board is comfortable with.
So COOP stands for continuity of operations
Thank you.
plan. Yeah. And I just meant immediately unavailable. Erica, we would never want you to be hit by a bus.
Thank you for stating that. That is. Yes, or if I win the lottery and that wouldn't actually make me quit my job, but. And this section actually is a great example of where, to let the cat out of the bag, the governance committee can plans to continue some of our work. This would be a great example. I'm glad you brought it up, Craig, where there's going to be some internal policies as a state employee that Vern has access to, that we can kind of crosswalk with some of what we want to monitor as a board. So the one of the, I think, exercises will be to see where some of the gaps are and where we can pull things that the state is already doing. So that would be a good example of that. Great question, though. Are we ready for treatment of external organizations and agencies? So would it be helpful to everyone if I read it aloud, or is this the way we're doing it okay with everyone? Okay, I'll just let everyone kind of read it. So any concerns around the way the executive director is being limited in terms of how they're treating outside stakeholders and partners and collaborative partners? This kind of speaks to the transparency role. Oh, Steve, I see your hand.
Yes, so this is following the Carver model that the executive director shall not. And if you look at the third point at the top of the next page and continue reading, shall not seek to understand or identify potential. It's
Well
in the
done.
Darn
wrong
it,
direction.
Steve. Yeah. Yes, so I might suggest operate without the understanding of. So not seek to understand or identify, but instead operate without the understanding of potential or unintended consequences. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And can you repeat that one more time
Mhm.
for everyone's clarification under resident and healthcare system stakeholder engagement at the top of page 3, first
Yes.
part of the paragraph?
Strike the words seek to understand or identify, because that's positive language, and put it in the negative language of operate without understanding of potential or unintended consequences. ...
And in that same vein, does the language following clear expectations need to be modified?
While they're reviewing, I think, Craig, you're asking about the language under clear expectations. While they're reviewing that, are folks just clear on the change to the resident and healthcare system stakeholder engagement? We're all good and understand the change we made there.
You look like you're wondering.
Thank you. Craig, I was just looking at the clear expectations. I'm not sure if I'm tracking what would need to be, what you're suggesting here. Right now it's saying accordingly, the executive director shall not allow trusted external organizations, agencies, and stakeholders to be without access to information or resources explaining the PDAB's role, responsibilities, and scope of authority. Help me understand what you were pointing out.
Actually, you are correct, and I misread it. My apologies.
Oh, okay. All right, good, good.
Thanks for catching that, Steve. So now we're on the engagement and transparency subsection. I want to call out that this is the one where we just highlight that we made sure that this policy reflected sort of the concerns we've had around sharing personal information, and the decision we made to be sensitive to the fact that we want to make information transparent to everyone, but also understand that we are dealing with health information, sensitive health information. And so this quadrant tries to strike that balance of, guiding the executive director and what kind of information is disclosed. But anything else in this particular subsection? Any concerns or questions? I know we as a governance committee really work to make sure that we're characterizing our stakeholders, making sure we're capturing everyone. So if there's any concerns, now is the time. But it sounds like everyone loves it. So. Yeah, I need to see some fingers. So now let's move down into communication and support to the board. And so this is where some of the monitoring data, as we've talked about, this will be that dance of holding the executive director accountable, but also not being overly prescriptive or putting any sort of, just making sure that we're giving the freedom to our executive director to do the work and also making sure we're doing our due diligence. So the executive director will not cause or allow the board to be uninformed or unsupported in its work. And then there's some direction around monitoring. Any concerns with the language or question? Stacy, is there anything you want to add to this in terms of helping, helping sort of flesh out what this all means with the non-compliance communication? I know those were questions we had in the governance committee, but I don't know if you have anything you think would help people sort of review this or.
More random thoughts, I guess,
Sure.
because this is a big policy area and
Right.
again, executive limitations speak direction to the executive director. I've packaged them into categories, the monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. I guess what I'd add to this, because your heads so often have been in the game of how does this get monitored? Having a written monitoring report for this policy, if you're really reading it carefully, because so much of it is subjective in nature, did we get enough trending information for us to feel like we could do our jobs as a governing board? That's subjective. So Vern will have some written monitoring information that will come in on the things that are less subjective, but this will be monitored largely by board discussion once a year, where you're sitting down as a group to say, when it comes to information and decision information and trends, or incidental information, or the clarity information of information, did we get what we needed? And that starts a conversation, a really important conversation between the board and the executive director that gets at the heart of our relationship. So this is one executive limitation that is monitored slightly differently from all of the other executive limitations that are pretty much straight up or down. Are we in compliance? Aren't we? Here's the facts, sort of thing. So that is, excuse me, the subtle difference with this particular policy.
Okay. So if there's no questions or clarifications on that one, should we go down to the information subsection? Kind of getting to what Stacy already said, this one deals with what the executive director is providing to us, what sort of information, so that we can do our job, so that we're not caught off guard or surprised or not able to make governing decisions based on lack of information. And then we get down to communication with the board, the communication to the full board. So again, just wanting to call out that this section has to do with how we're communicating with the executive director as a board collectively. So, and that's negative language, as you recall, will not work with individual board members instead of the full board on official board business, except when fulfilling reasonable requests. And of course, when delegated, that we had discussion around that. We well understand that our executive director needs to work, especially with sort of the unique nature of the kind of work we're doing as a board, but that needs to be decided by the board and explicitly delegated by the full board to for those kinds of individual interactions. Any questions on that? Then if you'll notice the last section, we have a to be determined section, and this is actually not because it's not important, it's because of what we stated before that one of the things that we're doing is making sure that any of the reporting requirements or the limitations we're putting around some of these things that get more into the meat of our work is compliant with Vern's role as a state employee. And what Matt Anderson, my fellow governance committee member, and I have proposed is that we continue to meet consistently as a governance committee, and we flesh these out more clearly and come back to the board with more detail around the executive limitations around drug selection and cost review. Again, we're trying to have that dance of making sure that all of our limitations and all of our monitoring really reflect the work that Vern is doing and the way we're operating together as a board. Matt, do you want to add any thoughts around this? I know this is, it's pretty bare bones, but we are committed to working on this and working with Vern. But I don't know if you had any additional thoughts for the board.
Nope, don't want to steal defeat from the jaws of victory.
Right. So this is our final quadrant.
I put my sunscreen on yesterday and I did get a little color.
Any discussion that you all feel like we need to have around this before we talk about approving it?
Awesome.
We know that we're going to need to build into our annual plan and our calendars ways for monitoring. So this is, as Stacy has said many, many times, the rubber will really meet the road as we build out some of these monitoring reports for Vern.
Going once, going twice, not hearing any additional questions or comments. It sounds like we're ready to move forward with moving this policy. Would someone like to move forward the executive limitations quadrant?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve the executive limitations policy with 2 amendments. One is deleting non-data in wherever it was found. And the second is in the resident and healthcare section, replacing the opening of the sentence with operate without understanding of or identifying.
It's been so moved. We have a second.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded. The floor is now open for comments and debate. Hearing none, Vernon will take the roll.
All right, Craig Acomb,
Aye.
Matt Anderson,
I,
Erica Barnes,
Aye.
Tony Laurie,
Aye.
Dr. Nick Pay is absent, Dr. Shandelmar, and Matt Tobrin.
Aye.
Aye. We have 6 yeas, 6 ayes, and 1 absent. The motion passes.
Congratulations, board. And I just want to reiterate and say again, all of us joined the board to protect the residents and the health system in Minnesota from unaffordable costs of prescription drugs. None of us joined the board to create governance policies. And so massive, massive thank you, Erica and Matt, for all of your hard work and rolling up your sleeves to do the work that none of us would volunteer for. So thank you so much for this and for your ongoing work. We deeply appreciate you that we now have the policies to do our work moving forward. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge shout out to Cam and Stacy, who take our, raging conversations in our governance work group. We're so docile compared to how they sometimes go, and you make sense out of them and what we're actually trying to get at. So thank you both so much for your work.
We'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is executive director update.
Yes, so the board will not be meeting as a whole again until the end of September. So I just wanted to flag a couple of things that I think I've sent out in emails before. But in terms of like patient engagement activities, I'll just report that Matt Anderson, Tony Laurie, and myself were out at Farm Fest for a couple of days last week. Interacted with about 70 people there. 70 people took our flyers that gave them the opportunity to scan a QR code, get to our website, and answer a few basic questions about drugs they're having difficulty affording. Those are slowly trickling in. It's the first time we've done this, so we'll do a review afterwards to see if that was the most effective way to gather patient input or not. But we do have also an in-person evening listening session here at the Wild Center in this auditorium on October 7th. And I think it'd be great if we could get 2 or even 3 board members there. I've heard from one board member that they would be able to participate, but it'd be great if others want to and think they're available to just let me know. I'll also then solicit the following week a virtual evening session, which I've not scheduled a date for yet. I'm working with my partners on that. But again, think about whether you'd want to participate in a virtual evening listening session as well. Real quick, as I've talked with the leadership team, we're kind of forming together some, what I guess we're starting to call working groups. We just talked about a governance working group that will meet on a go-forward basis. We're going to establish a UPL implementation working group. And we've already identified some board members, Tony Laurie, Dr. Shandelmeyer, Dr. Nick Pay, who will participate in that. And will be some intensive work through the fall to prepare that. And then secondly, kind of pivoting the data project, or well, now the data working group, into more of a focus on developing a drug cost review process working group. And that would be Matt Anderson, Tony Laurie, and Dr. Shandelmeyer again. So there's one more thing I was going to state. Actually, I think that's it.
Any questions for Vernon?
Just one quick question. I'm assuming within those working groups it will also involve our consultant, kind of Joel, or how will that?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes. So like in the drug review working group, Joel and his intern will be part of that. James is always invited as he can to participate in those things, and we bring him in specifically when we know we have something. And when we do bring on kind of an patient engagement consultant, I would anticipate them being in some of those conversations too.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, Vernon, you got off easy on that one. Moving to the last item on our agenda, is opening up the floor for public comments and just say that you all are an amazing and hardy group to sit through 2.5 hours of board governance development. And I hope that there are interns who can use this for papers or something, for school. With that, we take comments from the public. We're happy to hear from anyone who wishes to address the board. We extend this to both people at our meeting in person and also who are joining us online. We ask speakers to identify themselves and any organization you are representing at the beginning of your comments. And as noted at the beginning of the meeting, please remember that this meeting is being recorded. We ask all speakers to limit your comments to 2 minutes so that everyone has an opportunity, and we'll let you know when your time has expired. We also want to remind you that written comments are always accepted without limitations on how much information you may submit to us. And you can let us know if you'd like those comments posted publicly or not. And please understand that the PDAB generally takes action by formal deliberation and voting as a board at public meetings, so we cannot respond in real time to your comments. Board members may ask clarifying questions, but please do not take lack of response as an indication of lack of interest. Public comments are very helpful to our work and we want to hear them. So I will start by asking for people who are joining us online to raise your hand using the raise hand function to identify yourself if you wish to speak. And while you're doing that, I will ask if there's anyone in the room with us who wishes to speak. Ooh, we have one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh Nye, Ewald Consulting, here representing Pharma, former vice chair of the now defunct Prescription Drug Affordability Advisory Council. In your opening remarks, you had mentioned that the meeting agenda was posted for this meeting on the PDAB's website. It is not. And so I was just curious when that will be posted, and will the materials that you were looking through and that were on the screen here, when will those be posted? Thank you.
Sure. So these materials, I will request that they be posted today. It might take a day or two and there's a lag. And I mea culpa on the agenda. The agenda, I think, was simply what we just went through, but we can publish it on the website.
Any additional comments from the public today? I'm looking online. I'm not seeing any. Give folks a couple more minutes. But seeing no additional members of the public who have comments today, we can move to adjournment. This is the end of our agenda. So our next meeting is scheduled for September 29th at 9 a.m. and that'll be in this room, I assume. Additional information will be posted on our website as to the planned agenda for that day. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Nobody wants to adjourn?
Still moved.
It's having too good of a time. Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Okay.
It is moved and seconded that the board adjourn. The executive director will call the roll.
Sure. Craig Acomb,
Aye.
Matt Anderson,
Aye.
Erica Barnes,
Hi.
Tony Laurie,
Aye.
Dr. Nick Pay is absent. Dr. Schandelmeyer?
Yeah, you betcha.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay, I'll put that in the minutes. Matt Tobrin?
Aye.
Aye. We have 6 ayes, 1 absent. The motion prevails.
The motion is adopted. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.